The funniest thing the Pelicans could do would be to draft Bronny James, son of LeBron James. But would it actually make basketball sense, especially if you could get LeBron too? There's more to it than you might think. It's the Monday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Monday, tipping off, a week's worth of shows here. We got an interesting one, looking at Bronny James in this draft, LeBron James as well. You're probably thinking this is just a meme show. Jake's doing it for the jokes. There's more to it than you might think, particularly when it comes to Bronny James, and it's going to lead us to a larger discussion around the value of second-round picks, which is really important because, by the way, the Pelicans don't have any, at least not until 2030. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're the number one Pelicans podcast coming to you like nobody else does, looking at the draft stuff, the trades, the coaching future, all of that here on Locked On Pelicans. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. So let's get into this one because this isn't a joke. Drafting Bronny James. Yeah, do it. Screw it, the Lakers. Bring LeBron here. He said he wants to play with his son at some point. Maybe you can sign him on a veteran minimum deal or something like that. Let's pump the brakes on some of that. We'll get to the LeBron talk in a second here, but let's look at Bronny James. When you look at his numbers from college, they were not good. Not the type of thing that says that he's going to get drafted. Just 4.8 points, 2.8 rebounds, 2.1 assists in 25 games. That's not an ideal situation for the player. And then when you look at him in the combine, it's a little bit of a question of why he was one of 78 players invited to be there. And then they did the measurables, and he measured at 6'1.5" without shoes. He does have a 6'7.25" wingspan. That's not bad, but those measurables, at least the height, is kind of undersized a little bit. We talked about the other day how Rob Dillingham came in at 6'1", and that's not what you want from a guard at the NBA level, especially one being drafted potentially in the top 5. So is this just a guy that shouldn't be in the NBA? Is he just here because of his famous dad? And I think once you start to watch him in the scrimmages, hear him talk, and look at some of the other tests and drills that he went through, I think he has a place in the NBA, and you can kind of really start to see it, and he's impressing a little bit at the combine. Start with this. He says all of the right things. This is someone who's been in his dad's shadow his whole life. There's been immense scrutiny put on him, pressure, a microscope, and he's never folded to all of that pressure and is trying to just go out and kind of be his own person. And he said that at the combine, that no one had ever asked him about playing with his dad, and he's like, if it happens, it's great, but basically, I just want to be Bronny James and make it to the NBA in whatever role that's going to be. He's not coming in expecting to be as good as his dad. No one's going to be. So I think he has kind of the right mentality with everything here. And when you look at the other tools that he does have, despite being a little bit undersized, they're pretty good. He did second best in the shooting drill, going 19 of 25 from 3 from 5 different spots on the floor. When you look at some of the agility drills and things that he's done, his vertical leap was 40.5. That was the third best score of the combine. These tools are there. And then when you watched him in some of the scrimmages, I think is when it was really kind of eye-opening. This wasn't a guy trying to take over. This wasn't a guy trying to take over or be the guy on the team. Be the man, right? Be the leader. He was just trying to fit in and do well and to play his role. And I loved that. about him in all of this. When you look at projecting him out, no, he's not a top 5 pick. He'd be a borderline first-round pick at best. But you can see him being a very good role player in the NBA. Not a starter, but one of those solid role players who understands and knows their job. Think about that Josh Hart mentality. Whatever you need him to do, he's just going to go and do. He knows his place in the hierarchy. He knows that he's got to make extra passes, right? Kind of move with purpose, just fit into what's working. And that's how you carve a place out in the NBA. Look at Nickeil Alexander-Walker finally understanding this at the NBA level and having a role at times starting with the Minnesota Timberwolves. But he's a role player, and it took him a minute to kind of accept that mentality. And once he did, that is where he really started to kind of carve out a career. Not everyone's going to be a starter. Not everyone's going to be an all-star. But Bronny James kind of coming in with that role player mentality of like, I'll do what's best for the team. I just want to be here in the NBA. I like that. I like that. The measurables do seem very good on him other than the height. He seems to have the right good head on his shoulders, right? And that probably comes from he couldn't screw up. High school, college. If he did anything wrong, that was going to be all over the news, right? All over the news. And he didn't. And I think he's learned a lot from that in following kind of the footsteps of his dad. And I think that's a really great thing, to be perfectly honest. So, drafting him, screw the Lakers, kind of take him away from LeBron. I get the jokes, don't get me wrong, but I do think there's more basketball merit to selecting him in the draft, not with the 17th pick, not with the 21st pick, potentially. I mean, I guess we'll see how the rest of this draft and combine shakes out, but there's some merit towards drafting him, likely in the second round. More on that in a moment here. The other part of it is, could you get LeBron if you do get him? I don't think so. LeBron's going to opt out of his deal, and who knows what might happen. Maybe the Lakers go a weird direction with their head coaching search, and we talked about that on Friday, and LeBron hates it. But overall, I don't see him leaving the Lakers. It sounds like he's got 2 years left. Maybe then a third you could get him, but that wouldn't be 3 years. And so that'd be investing a lot into Bronny James if you don't like him as a prospect to get, a very old LeBron James at that point in time, who's still probably going to be a very good basketball player, but not at the level that he is right now, I don't think. So I don't think there's really much to it. I think LeBron stays with the Lakers no matter what, but it would be fun to mess with them, and Pelicans fans would be able to taunt Lakers fans if that's the case for sure for the next couple of weeks, with the draft being before free agency and all that. So you never know. But no, I don't think it'll end up happening. But I do think there's merit towards drafting Bronny James. So I mentioned the second round. Pelicans don't have a pick in the second round this year or in future years. Let's look at that, because that's something they might need to address, especially during the regular season. And I'm going to tell you why that's important coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. They have over 3 million members because it's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while watching your favorite sports and players. It's really simple. You pick more or less on the stat projection for 2 or more players, then you watch the winnings roll in. So get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a whole new level during basketball's postseason. And you heard me right, 100 times your money on PrizePicks, and you can do it with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey, baseball entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. And it's the #1 app because it's really simple to play. You can make your picks and submit your entries in under 60 seconds. PrizePicks also has quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types. And that's what makes PrizePicks the #1 fantasy sports app. So download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that is promo code Locked On NBA for a first-time deposit match up to $100 when you download the PrizePicks app. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And now, don't listen to sports shows that don't talk about sports, that just yell and don't give you what you want to know, right? Go to the free 24/7 sports streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And of course, make Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. If you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. Do you support drafting Bronny James, even if you know you can't get LeBron with him? So I would potentially take a flight, depending on how the rest of the draft shakes out, with him in the second round. I like that idea. I'd see a role player in him, to be perfectly honest with you. In this team, you can never have enough of those guys. You don't want a whole team made up of them, but around someone who just understands that he needs to fit around Zion would be a great thing. You get that guy cheap in the second round, there's value to be had there. And I think Bronny James could really be it. So there's merit to it, but you don't take him in the first round. You take him in the second round. The problem is the Pelicans don't have a second round pick this year. They don't have a pick in the second round next year. They don't have a pick the year after that. They don't have a second round pick till 2023 or till 2030. It's a number of years from now. That's a problem. Second round picks have gone up in value the past couple of years. When I first started doing this, and I've been covering the team for like 14 years now, almost 15 years. It's kind of crazy how long I've been doing this for. And in the beginning, especially when I was starting out and you're kind of like learning value, things like that, learning about the NBA more and more and more, and you gain a lot of insight to it. Second round picks didn't have a ton of value. Like they really didn't. For a long, long time, they were the actual equivalent of like a 10-day contract guy. Someone taken in the latter half of the second round usually was going to be like a 10-day contract guy that played with like 5 NBA teams on 10-day contracts, and then you never heard from them again. There just wasn't much value there. There's certainly exceptions. Nikola Jokic, right? The greatest second-round pick ever. Draymond Green, a very good second-round pick. But those are moonshots that you just never truly see happening all the time, right? Like Herb Jones is still very much an outlier. Second round has gotten better. Second round has gotten better, and it's producing more and more players. And as you have more G League teams too, there's value to be had there to filling out those rosters and taking a shot on a guy. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. It was a second round pick. But you've seen second round picks increase in value for trades, particularly as teams are navigating, the first apron, the second apron. Go look up the collective bargaining agreement, the CBA, to learn a little bit more about those. And we'll probably talk about them on an episode of Locked On Pelicans. The need for those second round picks to fill out your roster when you're an expensive team is really important, or just to facilitate a trade. Players can be traded now for second round picks that are useful players because they just don't fit what that team is doing, or they don't want to pay those guys, or what have you. So you've seen players, or just to dump bad contracts, right? Kyra Lewis Jr. was traded with the one remaining second round pick the Pelicans had. They had to spend 4 second-round picks to dump Devontae Graham, which was a smart salary cap move for what it would have done to them this season, last season as well. So all of those are really important things to kind of look at with this team. So say they're pushing, the luxury tax, or in a bad salary cap situation. They don't have second-round picks to dump a guy. Maybe that's a Larry Nance Jr., maybe that's someone else. They don't really have tons of bad contracts on this team, which is good. But you need those second-round picks to make that deal done. It would have been tougher to trade Kyra Lewis Jr. if you didn't have that. Or say you're a team like the Phoenix Suns. You need to add 1 or 2 players to your team, but you just don't have money, really. Trade second-round picks for those guys. You can do that, and you can at least get a little bit of depth. They got Rosalie Neal for a second-round pick last year, right? Like, that's a useful thing. Pelicans don't have that kind of ammunition. They don't have those kind of assets, and I think that's a bit of a problem going forward. Say you're like one depth piece away from being a better team or a title contender or something like that at the trade deadline next year. Are you going to trade a future first for that when you could trade a second? You won't. You won't make that deal, and you'll just go without the piece that you need. They need to find a way to acquire some second-round picks. And the blueprint is actually out there. The Phoenix Suns did this with the Memphis Grizzlies, where they traded a pick swap or 2, I forget what it was, first round pick swaps with the Memphis Grizzlies for 3 second round picks. They kind of took a future first round pick that who knows what it could be and traded it with the Memphis Grizzlies for 3 assets that you could use immediately. It was a smart deal. And I think it provided the blueprint for what New Orleans needs to do. They own all of their own future draft picks. They have a Bucks pick or 2 as well. Use one of those. Don't fully trade like an unprotected first round pick or anything like that for second round picks. Don't trade a first round pick, even if it's top 15 protected for 3 second round picks. Trade a future pick swap with one of your picks to another team and acquire a bunch of second rounders. Real simple, something like that is a move I think the Pelicans need to make to kind of replenish that second round pick, not war chest, but just have them. You end up not using them, it's okay, right? If things go as planned for New Orleans, that pick swap doesn't convey. A pick swap is basically, you saw it actually happen with the Bucks this year. One team gets the more favorable of the 2 picks. The Pelicans and Bucks make a trade, and there's a pick swap included in that, and the Pelicans get the better of the 2 picks, which actually happened this year, which I thought was kind of funny. So do that. It meant a difference of like 2 draft spots. That's not that big of a deal. To acquire a couple of second round picks that you can then use in other deals or to dump a bad contract. Imagine if getting Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, the difference was you need to include a second round pick that you don't have in there. You can't miss out on some of these deals here. There's an opportunity cost with it without that. So going and getting some second round picks, I think would be of immense value to New Orleans. I talked on Friday's show a little bit about how they haven't managed some of the draft picks and things like that the best. I don't think they've done a bad job by any means with that. This is the one area that I think they've done not the best job with, right? Trading a future first in that sign-in trade for Devontae Graham wasn't great, and then needing 4 draft picks to unload his contract wasn't a good move. That's some of what I'm talking about when it comes to mismanagement and things like that. Having more second round picks would be immensely useful for this team. Look, they're not going to ever be a second apron team. They're probably not even going to be a first apron team, but they're going to be in the luxury tax if they want to compete. If they don't, it's a larger discussion we're going to need to have. If you're in the luxury tax, you need those second round picks to at least be like cheap options for you here. Or to duck out of the luxury tax, say there's an opportunity that presents itself. I liked the idea of trading Kira Lewis Jr. There was no point in paying the luxury tax this season for Kira Lewis Jr. if it meant you would pay it in subsequent seasons. So if you end up in a situation like that, say there's an injury and they're not going anywhere, duck under the tax. I get it. It makes sense. So having those second round picks is going to be important for that. I'd like to see the Pelicans make a deal that refreshes that second round pick asset. I don't know what word I'm using here for it. So something to keep in mind if you see a trade like that, that's going to be a reason why the Pelicans did that. So coming up next, let's look at the NBA as a whole, or at least the Western Conference with some of these top teams. The Denver Nuggets in mind in particular. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans and what the Pelicans kind of need to think about teams like that. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money line, player props, and more. You're watching the NBA playoffs. You want to make them more interesting? Bet on the spread. Bet on the money line. Take some of the player props. Nikola Jokic to light up Rudy Gobert again. You can do that. We'll talk more about Jokic in the next segment here. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. You're going to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and the official sportsbook of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We're not slowing down at all in the offseason. After free agency, we may drop to 3 days a week, but I don't even know if we'll end up doing that, if we're just going to kind of keep 5 days a week. going because I like talking with y'all. If you want to join the community mock draft, I will post the link on Twitter. It's a Google form. Just give me your name, your email, and that's how we'll be able to kind of get in contact with y'all to do this. Everyone's going to get, who wants to participate gets assigned a team. Whoever gets the first pick, you make a pick. And we just kind of go through, no trades, anything like that. You just get assigned a team, you make the pick. I'll read the entries and everything off on a show. We'll do a whole show or two about it as well, so it'll be a lot of fun. So if you want to join in and kind of get involved with Locked On Pelicans, this is a really good way to do that. So let's switch gears from the draft for a minute here. I want to look at the NBA as a whole because I've been really thinking about that game between the Denver Nuggets and the Minnesota Timberwolves where Nikola Jokic dropped 40 on Rudy Gobert and just looked unstoppable. We talked about this a little bit during the live show last week too. Rudy Gobert is one of the best defenders in NBA history. You don't have to like him. He can annoy you. He annoys me, right? He's overrated at times in certain things, yes, but the dude's won 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards. There's no doubting that he is one of the best defensive players ever. And to see him just be reduced to ash against Nikola Jokic was wild to me. He wasn't playing bad defense at all. He really wasn't. It was just Jokic is going to go down as a top 15, 10 player of all time, particularly if he wins another title. And 3-time league MVP. And when he just does things no one has done. That was like a truly special performance from Nikola Jokic. And it was only 40 points, right? You would have been like, 60, then I'll pay attention. That was a special 40-point game that he had. He threw in that third quarter when he just cooked Rudy Gobert, cooked him. Didn't do the same move twice. Literally just broke out everything, and it was wild to watch. Impressive to watch. When you're building your team, when you're thinking about the Western Conference, you've got to factor someone like that in. The Denver Nuggets aren't going anywhere anytime soon, right? That's a team that looks built for the long haul. They have ownership that's willing to pay. Good for them. All of those things mean they're not going anywhere anytime soon. And if they're not going anywhere anytime soon, if the Pelicans are trying to compete right now too, you need to also plan around them. And I think that's something that's really important to do. Jokic is how old, by the way? He's 29. He's like young still, right? He'll be 30 next season. Whew. He like recently turned 29 too. He's not going anywhere, right? If you look at the Thunder and how young they are, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Chet Holmgren in his second year, J-Dub being young, they're not going anywhere anytime soon. You need to plan your team building around some of these teams, I think. Well, you want to kind of go and impose your will and find what makes you a special team. And I think the Pelicans are still kind of figuring that out a little bit other than just Zion Williamson. But where's your edge? What do you do about that sort of thing? And I don't know if they've truly figured that part out yet. But you've also got to factor in Nikola Jokic, Chet Holmgren. Victor Wembanyama is going to be a player you need to at least account for, right? Not necessarily during the regular season. You could lose all the games to them and still make the playoffs. But if you're going to want to win a title, you're going to have to play one of those teams, it feels like, in subsequent playoff years. And that means you've got to face those guys. Luka Doncic, though, I think the Pelicans have him kind of figured out pretty well with like Herb Jones and stuff like that. So you've got to factor that in. And that might change how the Pelicans approach this offseason a little bit. I've said maybe you could do the center on the cheap and go for a guard, right? If you go for Trae Young, you're not going to bring in Jared Allen too. But if you're going to need to go through Jokic, Chet Holmgren, is it better to have that center that can kind of handle those guys? Zion's not going to be able to do it. You can't keep Billy Hernangomez, who, whatever reason, just lit up Jokic and could stop him on the team the whole year until the postseason, right? You need to kind of build a balanced roster and kind of lean into your strengths, but also know what the strengths of other teams are too, and know that, those teams are going to be there. So does that change how you approach a Brandon Ingram trade, knowing that Denver's still going to be there, that the Thunder are still going to be there? Even the Timberwolves probably aren't going to blow it up, right? They're going to keep Cat, they're going to keep Gobert, they're going to keep Anthony Edwards, they're going to keep doing what they're doing. Now, I think New Orleans matches up pretty well with them. But you've got these other teams, and how do you kind of like factor that in for everything? And I think that's something to kind of keep in mind when you're coming up with trades for Brandon Ingram, and it's like, Trae Young, cool. Okay, but then you're going to have to go with center on the cheap. Is that the way to go? Is that going to bounce you out of the playoffs because of Jokic? Would Jokic just do it anyway, right? That's the other thing to kind of keep in mind. If he's cooking Rudy Gobert like that, there ain't no way anyone can guard him at all. And sometimes that's just the reality of the situation. It's not fun to kind of think like that, but it is, right? If Denver just kind of now cruises to their second straight title after going down 0-2 because Jokic woke up, I don't know if there's anything anyone can do. So maybe you don't need to kind of plan around that. But that's how kind of the balancing act with it. Do you plan around it or not? Or do you just lean more into your strengths? That's what makes this such an interesting and pivotal offseason, I think, for the New Orleans Pelicans as they start to try and figure all of that out, as their kind of vision for the future itself becomes a little bit clearer and we can see it better, and what the glaring needs are for this team, what they need to do to try and improve in the directions that they need to go. That's why we're going to be covering it all here on Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, the Bronny James episode. I never thought I would have been doing a show like this, and then it turns out like his combine has been going well, and you start to kind of like the player a little bit. See what ends up happening with him. No matter what, it's going to be kind of interesting. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. I appreciate you all so much for watching. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.